We're hosting this live at the Permian Energy Dialogues in Austin. This is such a great conference, and we're so thrilled to be a part of it. I'm Molly Determan, President of Energy Workforce and Technology Council. I'm joined by Derek Adams, who's the Managing Director of the Permian Energy Development Lab, and then also Matt Kolesar, who's the Chief Environmental Scientist at ExxonMobil. Thank you both for being here today and joining the conference.
Of course.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
We're talking, it's Permian Energy Dialogues. We're talking about the Permian. We know the Permian has long been a powerhouse for U.S. energy production, but today we're looking at another critical point, which is, can the basin also lead in technology development, operational excellence, and emissions transparency? So that's the topic that we're going to go into. Matt, I'll probably start with you. Just from ExxonMobil's perspective, why is emissions transparency and innovation such a focus right now, and particularly in the Permian?
Well, I might even just step back and not answer your question right away. I think we could all agree that U.S. onshore, the shale, has been innovating for 40 years, and so I don't think what's happening recently, and your questions in the emission space or environment space, should be a surprise or unexpected. It's really just a natural progression of the industry. As it's become not just a national powerhouse, but a global powerhouse and really having global impact, I think it's important for us to demonstrate that we can do it responsibly and produce those molecules, oil and gas, with the lowest environmental footprint possible. And so to deploy all the skills and innovation that we've used to develop those resources, now apply it to developing them responsibly and in a low carbon and low environmental impact is really important.
Absolutely, it is. What starts in the Permian changes the world.
That's true. That's exactly what happens. And again, the nature of U.S. onshore, the shale revolution, that's done it in all aspects of that development. And so what we're doing in the environmental and carbon space is really just another example of that.
Absolutely. So Derek, you're running a lab that's dedicated to testing and scaling new technologies. Why is the Permian the right place for these kinds of pilots and demonstrations?
Yeah, well, I think Matt hit the nail on the head, right? The Permian has long been this innovation kind of engine, right? And so it makes logical sense. The know-how, the capital, and the opportunities are there. We can call them challenges, we can call them problems.
Let's call them opportunities.
Let's opportunities. But that then brings opportunities to develop those solutions and to really let the Permian be a natural laboratory to test and have sort of be a competing place for ideas. And it's while it's obviously an oil and gas focused region. There's quite a diversity of these challenges, not just geologically or geographically. So I think that it's a big opportunity space to innovate across the energy spectrum.
Very exciting. So what y'all are saying, the Permian isn't just producing barrels; it's also proving ground for how new technologies are tested and scaled and all of those things. So Matt, what tools are you actually seeing being deployed today, whether it's sensors, satellites, are y'all using AI in all of this to improve performance but also reduce emissions?
Yeah, again, I'll answer your question in a second, but I really just want to build off of that, and
Please.
I think it plays right into that. One of the things that we think as a company ExxonMobil brings is our scale, both global and the resources we can bring to challenges and opportunities. But I think the Permian Basin has that advantage too, as a basin, as a region, as a resource, because it's such a large play and there's so many players involved, and there's so much capital deployed that it does allow us to scale and bring sort of infrastructure aspects to these solution sets. So for us, really in that vein, we have tried some traditional techniques like let's minimize flaring, right? And again, that's infrastructure related as we have better takeaway capacity, better operational controls. And then on the methane front, which is a real challenge and an opportunity for us to prove as a Permian Basin operator that we can do this responsibly. We've deployed everything. We have tried every technology available on the market, some not available on the market. We work with academics and still actively with all the leading thought leaders on what's next, because our objective, and I think this is really starting to permeate throughout the basin is I can drive these methane emissions to almost zero. I sort of know how to do that, but I have to prove it. And so part of our technology deployment has been, hey, let me go out and make sure I know where these methane emissions are and when they happen. So there's suites of continuous sensors and little small things you can stick right on equipment that's classified electrically, to cameras, to airplanes, drones, satellites. So we're going to deploy that whole suite. We'll optimize and rationalize that eventually, but until we figure out exactly what we're trying to mitigate, we're going to try it all.
That's awesome. And y'all try all of that in the Permian, and then this is also being utilized globally. Y'all have been such a leader in minimizing flaring. I think that it's important what ExxonMobil does because others in the industry follow your lead.
Yeah, it was important. And early on in my current role, I really saw the value of, it was important that ExxonMobil led and was very visible and vocal about how we led and make sure, as we certainly always felt that having a responsible footprint and lowering environmental aspects was important, to share that, not only just say, hey, this is important for our industry, but to share how we're doing it. And so we've been very open. We've got, 30 peer-reviewed journals from our scientific arm just on how we evaluate methane detection technologies. The work we've done on flaring, we've been very vocal about. And again, that's not as technology focused. It's more just making sure you have infrastructure and operational controls in place. But we've been very vocal about how important that is.
Yeah, I think we trained the U.S. State Department on the oil and gas industry, and I think that's one of the things that, they come in to Houston and we're giving them an overview of our industry, and 4 days later they walk away just like they came in expecting one thing out of our industry, and then they leave just kind of blown away by the technology and the innovation that happens in this industry. And I think that's kind of what you want is and it might be people that are skeptical of our industry is you just don't really, I think it's hard to understand and appreciate all of the investment and everything that happens in driving innovation in our industry. So I appreciate what y'all are doing.
Yeah, it's certainly, and I know your team's working on this as well. When you think of the emissions space, really a lot of credit to the Department of Energy that's really had almost a 15-year focus on developing technologies and seeding some of the academics through some of their grant processes. That's really been quite remarkably successful. And a lot of these companies are still relatively small. This is all brand new technology. Were born out of those programs, and now they're being able to scale nationally, and really now we're starting to see this global pull. And almost all of it really started in the Permian Basin because we had such a concentration of active players from industry that really wanted to solve these challenges.
That's awesome. So Derek, we talked about methane is just one piece of the puzzle. What other technologies, whether it's carbon capture, hydrogen, or water treatment, do you think could position the Permian as a global leader in innovation or continue to position the Permian?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, ultimately, right? I think, what can we do with flare gas? Well, you can do a lot with it, right? And I think that in general, oil and gas, it's been interesting to see it as sort of an enabler for a lot of these. You can call them energy transition or just energies of the future, but they're technologies that we know we're going to need going forward for energy across really the globe, but dovetail really well with existing oil and gas production. So, for instance, we're partnered with an oil and gas company at our test site out in West Texas who's doing a CO2 enhanced oil recovery project, right? And so obviously they have an insatiable appetite for CO2. It's actually very interesting because compared to a pure sequestration project, they're actually able to store 5 times as much CO2, replacing that oil with CO2 in the subsurface. So it's sort of like a win-win,
Yes.
for project economics and for the environment. But so we have a DAC hub that we're planning there at the pilot scale. The produced water is, also I guess we're sticking with opportunities, is a big opportunity to address. And so in a similar vein, we have about 5 or 6 different technologies that we're lined up out there to again test at the pilot scale. We were just talking earlier in the roundtable discussions about Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, who now has sort of transferred from the Railroad Commission some of their permitting authority for discharge, and that's looks to be imminent, and I think that'll set a great precedent going forward for a lot of these smaller pilots that then can be scaled across the basin.
Those roundtable discussions are really important. There was also some discussion in one of the panels earlier too about just the amount of produced water, and so it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I mean we have this dual challenge of we're running out of drinking water or fresh water for irrigation, and yet what do we do with all this produced water? So it's kind of a no-brainer. It's obviously very complex to sort of bring those two challenges and solutions together. But we can do a lot with that water. We're looking at treating it for various end-use applications, not just discharge and irrigation, but like even hydrolysis to make hydrogen. We're looking at taking the constituents, because a big challenge is less the water, and it's what's in the water, right? Those dissolved minerals, primarily salts. And so can you monetize, valorize, it's called, that brine, to help kind of offset some of these, obviously, additional costs associated with treating the water rather than injecting it.
That makes a lot of sense.
And Molly, can I just add to that?
Please.
Again? I'll just highlight again why scale is so important there again, because historically, anytime you have to manage that water is incrementally more expensive than our traditional ways we've managed that water. And so that was always sort of a disincentive or certainly a headwind, but when you think of the scale, that makes us a lot more practical and higher chance of success, right? Because now you have these large projects we can build and pilot plants, and you have a lot of industry partners partnering with your organization, and the academics are engaged. We have the regulators that are being very active and asking really good questions, but they're willing to sort of, we're playing out the science as it evolves and we understand it better. So we really have a perfect storm here of really solving a lot of the industry's and societal problems.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so beautiful about all of it is like how all these different players come together. And also, especially, on the Texas side of the Permian, when you have regulators that are willing to have discussions so that we can make sure that, this is all kind of being done in a smart way that can be scaled. All of it has to come together.
Yeah, and it's not just Texas. So, the Permian obviously doesn't understand that there are state boundaries there, right? And so, we work closely with our New Mexico partners as well in our organization, particularly on the produced water side. New Mexico State and their Produced Water Research Consortium has been, frankly, a leader, and I think, they've done an excellent job at really sort of leading the way in terms of demonstrating kind of here are the ways that we can do it, right, and that it's possible, and then on the Texas side as well. So the collaboration, and that's really what our organization is all about, is bringing all of those different stakeholders together to attack the problem and frankly work together, or maybe even have a dialogue. Yeah. Even
have a healthy dialogue. It's so important. So we're not going to use the word opportunity. We're going to use the word barrier. Okay. We're going to switch. So what's the biggest barrier that y'all see to scaling? So we talked about the importance of scale. What are some of those barriers? Is it cost? Is it regulation? Is it just proving that it works in the field? This is to both of y'all.
Yeah. You want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a handful of headwinds, challenges. And we've talked a lot about here at this dialogue about the changing administration priorities. That's actually not a headwind. I think at the end of the day, most of industry is trying to solve science problems and economic problems. And that's really always been the genius of the Permian. Mm-hmm. And that's what's really driven this entrepreneurial spirit of why it's been so successful for 50 plus years. I'll pick methane. It's something I know a lot about. I mean, it's an invisible, odorless gas that we're trying now to identify and mitigate and prove to the world that we've sort of resolved that challenge. So that's new, right? We're developing new accounting systems and new protocols for how to prove that to the world. There's other parts of the world that are trying to do that as well and sort of show the U.S. or ask the U.S. how to do it. So that's a challenge, right? Just to get everyone to speak the same language and protocol. And for water, produced water, also new, right? we've talked a lot about here this week already, is we're trying to do a different application. We think we have the science and the policies evolving to support this, but it's a natural curiosity and show me, right? This feels new and I just want to understand that. So, the regulators and I think certainly industry has this shared ambition to be protective of the environment and make sure this is done safe. But we just have to work through that. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you kind of ran through the list. It's demonstrate that you can do it, right? So pilots, I think, and our site providing sort of a neutral ground to do a lot of these small scale, either whether it be water treatment or whatever technology. I think hopefully will lend credibility to then these technologies to the general public. Our organization is also focused very strongly on workforce development and community development, right? Economic development, and so of course, developing the technologies we're going to need in the future, but then training the workforce to, fill the, you can't get a degree in a lot of these very nascent industries. And so sort of like, training programs that truly prepare, not just college where it may not prepare you adequately for a job, but like training for the actual, position, similar to, how ExxonMobil's training program is for all of their employees, which is excellent. And then, if we can bring some of that innovation literally physically back into the communities, right, of the Permian, where a lot of these projects are going to be stood up, then you help bring other businesses and help grow the economies that have seen, frankly, right, they've experienced boom and bust cycles for a very long time, and it has taken a toll on a lot of those communities.
It does. Workforce development and bringing all that together is so important. So just thinking about, like, y'all have both talked about collaboration. Derek, I just want to ask you kind of, you've talked about the role of test beds and partnerships and the importance of collaboration. So how does that collaboration between all of these different invested parties, how does that help speed up adoption?
Yeah, because you could argue that when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, right, it's maybe sometimes harder to get things done. But we've seen, frankly, I think just the opposite. It comes down to willing and active parties that have a shared vision of that future that we're trying to get to. So be it on the industry side or academia, and frankly, just ensuring all stakeholders are kind of getting what they want out of it, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody has a little bit of a different kind of metric that they're trying to hit, or piece of the pie, not that they're taking, but that they're able to leverage, to advance whatever it may be. Maybe it's more research focused, right, at the academic level, and obviously industry maybe more on the commercial side, trying to drive costs down, and finding not just technologies but projects that integrate together to be able to kind of do all of these things simultaneously is a challenge, but we've also been pretty successful in doing it. So.
But it can probably, if you manage it right, sounds like you are finding out why people need the different things out of it, that it can really help you go even further, especially the more groups that you have involved. So Matt, just kind of transitioning a little bit, trust in emissions reporting, you mentioned that, because we're working, there's different standards on emissions reporting, and so like that trust in it is critical. What do operators, regulators, customers need to make sure that data is credible and actually used in the business's decisions?
I think not only the Permian, but I think the U.S. does have an advantage there. We've got this long-standing sort of accounting process through the federal government, which is continuing to evolve, and I think gets better, but it's sort of been ingrained in our workflows as an industry, right? We're just used to having transparent emissions reporting. Now for methane and other greenhouse gas, is it spot on, dead accurate yet? Because we have all these new technologies that are showing us new insights to where we might have opportunities to mitigate. I think the industry just needs to keep being open and recognize that the whole world wants to know. This isn't a Permian issue. This isn't even a domestic U.S. issue. This is a global, right? Our products are going all over the world, and the world wants to be assured that as long as the world needs our products, that they're being developed responsibly. And as my role gets to sort of oversee global operations, the Permian is one of the premier producers. And so I think we should, as an industry in the Permian, should embrace that, right? It's a kind of a superpower that we are producing this really high quality resource with this very low environmental footprint. And so any aspect to put it in a protocol or process to prove it, we should run for it.
Yeah.
And just to follow up on his comment, I think, right, we're all competitors out there as industry, the hundreds of operators in the Permian Basin, but on sustainability or environmental issues, I think we all share that common vision of, hey, let's make sure we do this as responsible as possible. And it's a very open dialogue in that context.
Absolutely. Working for a trade association, I get to see the competitors come together and share best practices, and in this area and also around workforce development in particular. Those are areas where I feel like I continue to be so impressed by how competitors are willing to come together and kind of put their company hat aside for the industry. So maybe let's just I just want to get y'all's thoughts on the future. If you could leave this audience with one thought about the future of innovation in the Permian, what would it be? Derek.
Cool.
It's a big one.
Yeah, one thought. Well, I have lots of thoughts because I think the future is very bright, right? I think that there's a ton of opportunity out there going forward from, for the next 50 years on, things like CCS, hydrogen, renewables. What's really amazed me is the ability that oil and gas has had to enable a lot of sort of technology innovation that probably otherwise would not have gotten its start if not for the integration and kind of working hand in hand with some of the challenges that oil and gas has had. So I think that the future is going to be a place where the Permian is obviously still going to be a global powerhouse when it comes to energy production. And I think that the energy mix may change over time, and maybe the energy load, right, depending on what's out there in terms of what's consuming that energy may change over time. But it will be, a place that innovation and iteration, I think, is going to be important for a long time.
I appreciate the hopeful, optimistic Tim.
Yeah, and I just echo that. I mean, we're certainly the innovation is going to continue. It will probably accelerate. The Permian will look very different on the efficiency, the scale, the transparency of the sustainability footprint. I think all that will be almost sort of real-time monitoring of emissions and water management. I think that'll be very open to the public, which is, sort of serves everyone well and make sure the public trusts what we're doing, and not just the Permian public, but the global public. Mm-hmm. So I think only good things in the future for the Permian Basin.
Like Derek said, the future is bright. What starts in the Permian changes the world, and I really appreciate what y'all are doing to be a part of that. So appreciate you joining the Energy Perspectives podcast and here in Austin, and looking forward to the rest of the Energy Dialogues conference. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.